I had always been someone who thrived in the world of creativity. My name is Luke Adams, a 37-year-old independent filmmaker living in Salt Lake City, Utah. While most people around me worked 9-to-5 jobs, I had the privilege of crafting stories through the lens of a camera. My small studio was my sanctuary, where ideas were born, molded, and eventually turned into projects for major companies. But I preferred working with a small, passionate team rather than a large corporation. The hustle was worth it, but it was never without its challenges. I was the kind of guy who could spend days in the editing room, perfecting every cut, every sound. And when the workday ended, I'd often lose myself in a quiet, solitary night of reflection. But something was always missing. The unpredictability of my job left me walking a tightrope, balancing between the highs of completing a project and the lows of uncertainty about the next paycheck. On the surface, my life seemed stable. I had my beautiful wife, Jessica, a 33-year-old successful dentist who had her own private practice in the heart of the city. We had been married for 8 years and life had been good. Our 6-year-old daughter, Ava, filled our home with laughter, love, and an ever-growing sense of joy. I loved my family more than anything in the world, but lately something felt off. There was a distance between Jessica and me that we couldn't seem to bridge, no matter how hard I tried. Jessica was always busy with her practice. She worked long hours, constantly running from one patient to the next, barely taking a moment to breathe. I understood, of course. Her success in her career meant stability for our family, and I respected her for that. But when we were together, I noticed how her mind seemed to be elsewhere. It wasn't that we fought. There were no big arguments, no dramatic blowouts. It was the silence that concerned me. The space that had slowly crept between us over the years. In the quiet moments, when Ava was asleep and the house had settled into a peaceful calm, Jessica and I would try to reconnect. We would have dinner together, talk about our day, but it always felt like there was something unsaid hanging in the air. We had become so used to the ebb and flow of daily life that we never really stopped to ask ourselves how we were feeling, what we needed from each other. It had been a slow drift, one that neither of us had fully acknowledged until it was too late. Then one night I decided it was time to change things. I couldn't keep going on like this, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I needed to make an effort to do something grand, something that would remind both of us why we fell in love in the first place. We needed a break, away from everything. I planned our anniversary getaway meticulously. The 9-year mark of our marriage felt like the perfect time for a reset, a chance to reignite the spark that had dimmed between us. I booked a secluded villa in Sedona, Arizona, a place renowned for its breathtaking views and tranquil atmosphere. I imagined the red rock formations, the desert air, and the quiet that would surround us, just the two of us, away from the pressures of everyday life. I saw it as an opportunity to reconnect, to remind Jessica and myself of the beauty of our relationship. The night before we left, I packed our bags with excitement. I was ready for this. I knew Jessica had been working hard, and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. A little time away would be the perfect antidote to the stresses we'd both been carrying. Maybe it would even bring us closer, I thought. I had hope, and I clung to it as we drove to the airport the next morning. When we arrived in Sedona, the landscape was even more stunning than I had imagined. The wide open skies, the sweeping desert views, and the serenity of the surroundings made everything feel possible. It was exactly what we needed, or at least that's what I thought. But Jessica wasn't the same. The moment we stepped into the villa, she pulled out her phone. She was constantly checking it, typing messages, scrolling through emails. I tried not to let it bother me, but it was hard to ignore. I wanted to talk to her, to enjoy the peace, but instead she was lost in her digital world. I told myself it was just exhaustion from the trip, maybe the stress of her practice. She had been under a lot of pressure lately, and I knew how demanding her job could be. I tried to be patient, to give her space, but the distance between us felt even more pronounced here, in this beautiful place meant for reconnection. That evening, after a quiet dinner, I decided it was time to give her a surprise. I had picked out the perfect diamond ring, something I'd been saving for a special moment. I knew it wasn't the right time for a big celebration, but I felt that this was a gesture that could reignite something in us. I wanted to remind her how much I loved her, how much she meant to me. Maybe this would help us find our way back to each other. I handed her the ring, hoping she'd see the love behind it. But Jessica's response was not what I expected. She smiled, but it was stiff, forced. She didn't lean in for a kiss. She didn't take the ring with the enthusiasm I had hoped for. Instead, she pulled away slightly, and after a few long seconds, she spoke. Her voice was soft but firm, almost as if she had rehearsed it in her mind before saying it aloud. "Luke," she began, looking me in the eyes, I think I need to be honest with you. I've been thinking a lot about us lately. I feel like there's something missing. I want to spend the night with Evan. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I couldn't have heard her right. Evan? Who was Evan? My mind raced, trying to catch up with what she was saying, but I couldn't make sense of it. Evan was a colleague of hers, a specialist she often worked with on projects related to her dental practice. But I never imagined there was more to their relationship than that. The world seemed to stop as I processed her words. The villa, the red rocks, the evening sky, all of it faded into the background as her revelation sank in. I need to be with Evan tonight, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. I could hardly breathe. What was happening? I had no idea what to say, how to react. I was frozen, standing in front of the woman I loved, who was telling me that she wanted to be with someone else. The air between us thickened, and my mind began to race in a million directions. What had I missed? What had gone wrong? As Jessica stood up and walked toward the bathroom, I couldn't help but feel a crushing sense of betrayal, as if the foundation beneath me had suddenly crumbled. I didn't know what to do. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands shaking. I stood there for a long moment, unable to process the pain that was now flooding every part of me. I had no idea how the rest of the evening would unfold, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer living in the world I thought I knew. I sat there, motionless, in the quiet villa that once felt so peaceful. The moments leading up to Jessica's words seemed like a blur, fading into the background of this new, suffocating reality. I could hear the soft hum of the ceiling fan above me, but it felt distant, like everything was happening in a dream, disconnected and unreal. The ring I had given her, once a symbol of my hope to rekindle something precious between us, now felt like a cold, empty object in my hand. Jessica hadn't said much more as she left the room, her footsteps barely audible as she moved toward the bathroom. I remained frozen in place, the weight of her words pressing heavily on my chest. I couldn't understand it. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my voice wouldn't come. I was paralyzed by the sting of what I had just heard. Evan. The name echoed in my mind, repeating over and over like a cruel refrain. Evan was someone I had always known as a colleague of Jessica's, someone who came up in casual conversation every so often. I knew him professionally, or at least I thought I did. But this, what she said, was nothing like what I had imagined. A night together? What did that mean? I had tried to dismiss my suspicions before, thinking they were just insecurities creeping in because of the stress of our busy lives. But now I couldn't ignore the signs. There had been too many times when Jessica seemed distant, too many moments when I had felt like I was being shut out. The more I thought about it, the more everything started to click into place, painfully so. I could feel my heart racing in my chest as I stood up and walked toward the bathroom door. I needed answers, needed to know what was really going on. But before I could knock, I heard the faint sound of Jessica's voice from inside, muffled and distant. I knew she was probably on the phone with him. Evan. My stomach churned at the thought. I stood there for a long time, my hand hovering over the door handle. It was hard to think straight. Everything felt so off, so wrong. What had I done wrong? Was it my fault? Had I failed her in some way that made her seek comfort from someone else? I couldn't sit there in silence anymore. I needed to know the truth. My hand reached for the phone in my pocket, and for a moment I hesitated. Should I check her messages? Was that the right thing to do? I didn't want to invade her privacy, but the doubt in my mind was consuming me. I stepped away from the bathroom door and paced around the room. My mind was racing, spinning wildly, out of control, trying to make sense of this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, not when she had made it clear that there was something far more complicated going on. Finally, I made the decision. I walked over to where Jessica had left her phone on the nightstand. My hands trembled as I picked it up, my heart pounding as if it might burst from my chest. The screen lit up and I unlocked it without hesitation. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew deep down I had to see it. And there it was. Messages. Dozens of them. Between Jessica and Evan. They were intimate, full of inside jokes, flirtation, and words that I had never heard her say to me. Words that made my stomach tighten and my throat close with grief. Photos. Photos that she had never shared with me, moments that she had clearly been experiencing with him, not me. The air in the room felt thick and suffocating. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook harder as I scrolled through the conversation, each new message feeling like another blow to the chest. My world, which had always seemed so steady, was falling apart around me. How could she do this? How could I not have seen it coming? I felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of anger, mixed with an unbearable sadness. The betrayal stung like a physical wound, and I felt like I was losing everything. My wife, my family, the life I thought we had built together. Before I could process everything further, I heard the bathroom door open and Jessica walked out, her eyes meeting mine. She could see it. She could see the devastation in my face, the raw hurt that was now written all over me. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said, her voice quiet, almost apologetic. But there was no real remorse in her eyes. There was only the same distance I had felt for so long. I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight, constricted with emotion. I wanted to scream, to demand why, to ask how long this had been going on. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I simply stood there, holding her phone in my hand, the silence between us louder than any words could be. "I'm sorry," she said softly, though I knew it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The next few minutes felt like hours. The air was thick with the weight of everything left unsaid. Finally, I found my voice, my hands gripping the phone tighter as I spoke through gritted teeth. "Get out," I said, the words sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. Jessica didn't argue. She just stared at me for a moment before walking toward the door. She paused for a brief second, and I could see the hesitation in her eyes. But she didn't say anything else. She left. The door closed softly behind her, and I was left standing in the silence, holding the phone, as if it might somehow make sense of everything that had just happened. But there was no sense to be made. My heart was broken. The life I had built, the love I thought we shared, was gone in an instant. And as I stood there alone, I knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever be the same again. I stood there in the empty room, my hand still gripping Jessica's phone like it was some sort of anchor, though I knew it wasn't. It only served as a reminder of the world I had lost in an instant. The quiet of the villa now felt suffocating, each second stretching painfully long as I tried to process everything that had happened. My mind was a whirlpool of confusion, anger, and betrayal, each emotion pulling me in different directions, none of them making any sense. She had left. Just like that, she was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered reality. I couldn't even look at the phone anymore. It felt like a weapon, something that had ripped my world apart. I tossed it onto the bed, my eyes scanning the room as if expecting some sort of answer to appear in the stillness. But there were no answers here, only questions. How long had this been going on? Was it just Evan? Or had there been others? My stomach churned at the thought of Jessica being with someone else, of her finding comfort in someone else's arms, someone she had been talking to all along without my knowledge. The weight of that realization was too much to bear. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my head in my hands as the tears finally began to fall. I hadn't allowed myself to cry up until now, too proud, too angry to admit the pain that was slowly consuming me. But now, in the cold silence of the villa, I couldn't hold it back any longer. I thought about Ava, my beautiful little girl. She had no idea what was happening, no idea that her world was about to change forever. How could I explain this to her? How could I even look her in the eyes when I felt like I had failed her, failed both of them? The thought of losing Jessica, of the life we had built together, felt like a punch to the gut. But losing Ava was something I couldn't even fathom. I wasn't going to let that happen. I would fight for her with everything I had. But as the tears continued to fall, I knew that things would never be the same. I spent the rest of the night pacing around the villa, unable to sleep, my mind spinning in circles. I tried to process what had just happened, to understand how Jessica could betray me like this. How could she, after everything we'd been through? After all the years of shared dreams, laughter, and love? How could she just throw it all away? I kept thinking about the messages, the photos. I had seen enough to know that this wasn't just a mistake or a fleeting moment of weakness. This had been building for months, maybe even longer. I was the last to know, the last to see the truth. And that truth burned like fire in my chest. By morning, I had no more tears left. I was numb, too drained from the emotional storm to feel anything but an overwhelming sense of disbelief. I had always considered myself a patient man, someone who understood the complexities of relationships, of life. But now, standing on the precipice of this new reality, I realized how little I truly knew. I couldn't stay here in Sedona. The villa, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a tomb. I packed my things quickly, barely able to focus on the simple tasks in front of me. All I could think about was getting home, getting back to Ava and to the life I would have to rebuild from the ruins of my marriage. When I arrived back at the house, everything seemed off. The familiar sights of our home, the kitchen, the living room, the pictures on the wall, felt like they belonged to someone else. It didn't feel like home anymore. Ava was still with my sister. Jessica had asked me to take care of her while she went to visit her family for a few days. That was the last thing I had heard from her. There had been no calls, no messages. Nothing. She had just left and I hadn't heard from her since. I walked through the house, still in a daze, trying to hold myself together. The silence in the house was deafening. I went straight to the bedroom and stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I didn't recognize the man looking back at me. Who was this person? Who was I now? I ran my fingers through my hair, the exhaustion weighing heavily on me. My heart still hurt, and my mind kept flashing back to everything Jessica had said. The night with Evan. The messages. The lies. It felt like my entire life had been a lie. The next few days were a blur. I tried to focus on work, on the film projects that had been stacking up before all this started. I thought that maybe if I buried myself in the work, I could forget, at least for a moment, the pain that was gnawing at me. But it didn't work. I couldn't escape it. Then came the text. It was from Jessica. "I'm sorry, Luke. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the reply button. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had hurt me. But another part of me was still that man who had loved her with everything I had. The man who had believed in us, in our marriage. Could I even hear her out after everything she had done? I didn't respond. I couldn't. Days passed and the hurt began to shift into something else. Something sharper, something I had to face head on. It was anger. And it was all directed at Evan. He had been more than just a professional acquaintance, more than just someone who worked with Jessica. He had been the one to break the trust one had placed in both of them. He had been my friend, my colleague. And now I had lost everything because of him. Evan's reputation started to slip. I heard from mutual friends that his business was suffering. He was losing clients left and right, and it wasn't just because of me. It was because people found out about his affair with Jessica. It was all over town. But it didn't make me feel any better. It didn't undo the hurt. And all the while, I had to figure out how to move forward. To rebuild my life, to figure out how to raise Ava alone, to get my career back on track. But how could I do any of that when the foundation of everything I had known was now crumbled beneath me? I had no choice but to move on. To start over. But that didn't mean the pain would go away. Not yet. The first few weeks after Jessica left were a blur. Time seemed to move both too slowly and too quickly at the same time. I woke up each day, forcing myself to get through the motions. Work, errands, keeping everything running as normally as possible. But nothing felt normal. Nothing felt like it used to. It was as if I had woken up in someone else's life, a life that no longer made sense to me. Ava came home a few days after I returned from Sedona, and when I saw her, I felt the tiniest flicker of hope. She was the one thing I could hold on to. Her laughter, her innocent joy, it was like a lifeline. She didn't understand why Mom wasn't there. I hadn't told her everything. I couldn't. She was too young, too innocent to grasp the weight of what was happening. "Daddy, when's Mommy coming home?" she asked one evening, her big brown eyes full of trust and confusion. I swallowed hard, blinking away the tears that threatened to fall. "She'll be back soon, sweetie. I'm sure of it." I said it more for myself than for her. I wasn't sure of anything. But despite everything, I did my best. I made her breakfast every morning, took her to the park, and helped her with her school projects. I tried to keep her routine as normal as possible, even as my own world had been upended. I knew deep down that she needed stability, and if there was one thing I could do, it was be there for her. No matter how broken I felt inside. As for Jessica, I heard nothing. No more texts, no phone calls. Just silence. It was as if she had disappeared from my life, leaving nothing but the mess she had created behind. I hadn't responded to her last message, and I didn't plan to. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was nothing left to salvage. Trust, once broken, could never be fixed. Not in the way it was before. The silence wasn't easy to endure. In the quiet of the house, I found myself revisiting the same painful thoughts. It was a constant cycle of anger, hurt, and confusion. Why had she done it? Why Evan? I had known him. He had been a friend, someone I trusted. And now he was the reason everything I knew was gone. I had heard from a few people that Evan's life was starting to crumble. Clients were pulling out of his practice, and his reputation as a skilled oral surgeon had taken a hit. It was a slow decline, but it was real. He had lost everything that he had built, just as I had. But knowing that didn't give me any satisfaction. His fall from grace didn't erase the betrayal. I tried to focus on work, but that was hard too. The projects I had lined up before everything fell apart seemed meaningless now. I was constantly distracted, my mind wandering back to the mess of my personal life. But one thing I couldn't ignore was the fact that my career had taken a turn for the better in recent months. I had wrapped up a couple of smaller documentaries, and the buzz around them had started to grow. People were talking. My studio, small as it was, had picked up some momentum and I was getting offers from bigger clients. There was a sense of validation in that, but it was fleeting. Work couldn't fix what had been broken at home. One night, while scrolling through emails, I came across a job offer that would change everything. A big production company had reached out, wanting to partner with me on a feature film project. The kind of opportunity one had been dreaming of for years. It was my big break, and on some level, I knew it could be the key to rebuilding my career. But when I stared at the offer in front of me, it felt hollow. I wanted to take it. I needed to take it. But the question lingered, would it be enough? Could any amount of success fill the void left in my life? As I was grappling with that decision, a message came through on my phone. This time it was from my lawyer. It was official. The divorce papers had been filed and Jessica had agreed to terms. She would have visitation rights, but I would have full custody of Ava. I stared at the screen for a long time,